Yeah, shall we continue from host object from previous discussion? Okay, so I am discussing few points related to host object. Um, like first point, I can say accessible from the point of accessibility, like Redux. We have in an application we have multiple objects. Object 1, object 2, object 3, but all objects contain limited life scope. Okay, some having a transient life scope, some having singleton life scope, and some having throughout the application like scope life scope. Okay, so from the point of life, we can say that any object, there we have minimum one object we needed to run throughout the application. So that object we can refer as a host object. Okay, this host object whose lifetime is throughout your application. We have multiple objects, controller, some services. Their lifespan is limited. It can be a just transit, I can say scope. Some are singleton, but their lifespan is limited. We have, this is the main object. With this object our application is continuously running. So we can say this from the point of lifetime. Okay, now coming to the we discussed now the point related to the host object based on the lifetime. Now coming to the other point, we have host, generic host. Why we have concept of generic host? Previously in ASP.NET Core 3.0, before 3.0, we have different host object. For web application, one web host object, and for long running other host object. I host for long running, for web I web host. Now from after 3.0, we have only one host object. It can able to run, it can act as a interface for both services, hosting services as well as a web host. Okay, coming to the OS point of view, regardless of the operating system what you are running, mostly we have, for Windows we have Windows services, for Linux we have daemon services, and long console services, console app. These are, although the concept is same, each services is different, it integrate into the operating system handling startup and shutdown command. So we can say that we have Windows services, console services, all are same services which are running in the OS, but based on the closing, who is shutdowning, who is starting, how, based on the lifespan we can say that different services. So one is console. The lifespan of this console services is only executing DLL, then it will stop, not running, stop, not running. Coming to the long running process, whose lifespan is multi like a long time instead of console. Console having lifespan is after execution of the DLL, its lifespan will be gone, whereas other services whose lifespan will be maintained. From the point what I am saying, that we have multiple services, internally all are same, based on the stopping and starting and stopping. From the life point we can say that we have different host of, we have different concept. Okay, okay, Now just I will explain from the point. Now basically I covered 2 points, core points. One is based on the lifespan. We have only one object like Redux. That object act as a uh, main heart of the application. From that we are extracting all the other services will communicating that heart object. From that lifespan we can say that is a host object, like we have Redux whose lifespan is up to throughout the application. Internally other components will communicating and communicating to all, and all components will have access to the Redux object. In the same manner here we have host object. It is the that object lifespan is throughout the application life. Remaining object will communicating to that host object. Will explain how it is communicating. It directly host or remaining directly individual object will not communicate to the host object, but internally host object will encapsulate other objects. Like I will explain what it is encapsulating. Mostly main it is encapsulating two object: configuring object, logger object. These two object lifespan is throughout the application. These two object, and for to get accessibility we have depend service container. These three main objects internally host object is encapsulated. So other objects like controller services will communicate to the host object and retrieve this object: configure, logger and service. Directly they are not using the host object. Host object will hold this object. Host object lifespan is throughout the application. It hold this object. One is configuration, dependency injection. Dependency injection means service container, and finally we can say logger. You said that this object lifespan is throughout the application. Logger we need throughout the application. Configuration we need throughout the application. Service container we need throughout the application. Host object will internally encapsulate these three objects. Second point I said based on the services. We in OS we have console services, long running services, Windows services. How they are differ based on the starting and stopping command. Who is starting? By default we are starting, but who is stopping? If it will after execution of the DLL it will itself stop, then it is console. But explicitly we are stopping, that is through Windows services. That is I said the related to second point. And in the second point itself I said generic why it is means previously we have two host services: iHost services and iWeb host services. iWeb host services responsible to handle the encapsulated Kestrel server as well as a high hosted services plus Kestrel services, whereas iHost encapsulated only iHost services to handle HTTP web host, and these are like that. Now coming to third point, I will just say from the first point itself, second point itself I will briefly explain. Console app without host, console app with host and hosted services, console app with hosted services and worker services, with console app with hosted services and handling the HTTP request. So I said that host object without console app without host object whose responsibility is just only execute the DLL. Console app with host object but handling only the I hosted services, it considered as a worker services.